Now, this is on in both of these books. So it's in chapter 10 in Breaking Emotional Barriers to Healing, and also it's in the very beginning of the how to pray when healing doesn't happen. It's also on page in here somewhere. In the very beginning, you'll see it. It's a grid. Yeah, it's on page 22 on this book. All right. So for those that are watching, you want to ask forgiveness of others, forgiving of yourself to the Father. Any demonic presence, release all that. Now, and then pray again for healing. And then if they're not healed, then you can go to this sheet, all right? Now, for me, if I have a person that has been prayed for, like Penny, she's been prayed for over and over and over again, I go right to this sheet because chances are, unless I was Benny Hinn, chances are she's going to have some difficulty. Now, even with Benny Hinn, I've had people that have come to me after like a week later because you were in the moment, you will be healed, but you go back to the life of you stress, then stuff starts coming back in because you lose your healing. So when did you first, number one on the prayer card, when did you first have this condition or feeling? Now, again, if the event is in adulthood, find the earlier time with the same feeling. So again, typically in my book, in chapter 10, of course, it's a little larger. This is a little bit more condensed on the prayer card. The only thing that's different is that there's two types of prayers you're going to be praying for. So when they said I've got something that happened, it's either going to be a known trauma, we talked about this yesterday, or an unknown trauma. A known trauma is something that actually happened. I had a car accident, such and such happened, and then you go to that car accident, and you pray over the things that happened. Now, one thing that's important, and I talk about this again in the book, is that if there's multiple events in that one trauma, for example, I had a woman, and because I was a first responder myself, I've been to scenes like this, but the woman told me, she was in her 50s, she said about 10 years ago she was in a car accident, and the car flipped over and it was upside down in her seatbelt. She was stuck, she couldn't get it off, but she was upside down in water, and she felt she was going to die. All right, so that's just PTSD right there. All right, so then of course first responders came there, extricated her to help her get out. She was in a tremendous amount of pain because they had to pull her out because of the car was accordion style, and so it was the pain of getting on the gurney. That's the next trauma. The trauma then of going to the hospital in the ambulance. Being on the cold gurney in this cold, you know how cold ERs always are, and emergency rooms, I don't know. So, but anyway, so they, when we get there, then we transfer them over from one stretcher to the gurney, and then just all this stuff. And then the longer they've had an incident, the longer they've had a trauma, or the longer they lived with it, you have to deal with the way of life, what it was like to live in the trauma. Because what happens is my mind will have a lot of changes. I can't pick up my kids like I used to. I can't do this. All the losses they had, tremendous amount of losses. And so always deal with the events that actually happened, and then what was it like to live with it. And then they'll be healed. Because you're dealing with a succession of traumas. It's all in processing. All right, does that make sense? So when I did that, this person, obviously, the pain was gone. Now, so, all right, so then once you find and for this, to make it simpler, just find out what the problem is. Let's say like with Penny, she said that now remember now, listen to the words and watch where it's located. So number one, if you listen to the words, remember I said, hear what they're saying. And ask them what it was like to live with this. So if it's not good enough, or I feel sad or helpless, or I can't move forward, All those words represent some some trauma that's been happening. And now this is the way they feel now, but you think about it, especially in emotional traumas like depressions and anxieties. Those are typically, granted, okay, my grandmother just died. I'm going to be sad and depressed over that. So you deal with the fact that they lost that person. But here's what I want you to do. You must believe in yourself. Believe in what you see in front of you. If you see the person in front of you has a greater amount of overwhelming response, greater than they should, use your common sense. If it seems like, for example, their grandmother died and they're really upset about it, but she died 10 years ago, and you see that the amount of loss is greater than it should be, then usually it is. Now, don't doubt yourself. Go with your first instinct. And if that's the case, it's because typically the more trauma I feel now, the more traumas I've had over the years that's made it this amount of response. Does that make sense? I see this a lot in my office, not necessarily, I mean, also online or in churches, but for example, sadly, there's a lot of affairs, there's a lot of issues of infidelity going on, a lot of being hurt by how people treat you or being treated. And what happens is if a person is feeling overwhelmed, and for example, I had a woman that she found out her husband had an affair, I think it was 30 years ago, around the time that they were going out. Never anything since, but when she found out, she just had this explosion of anger and couldn't forgive him ever since. Well, to me, it doesn't make sense. Okay, I'm thinking it's my mind. I'm not saying this to them. So usually what the case is, I said, did anybody else in your life, your father or mother, have an affair, or you felt betrayed? That's the big issue, more betrayed rather than as an affair. See, yes, my father had it on my mom, and it hurt the whole family. How could he do this? Well, it's the exact same way she was talking about her husband. How could he do this? So I went back to the father issue and released it, because the early trauma, the earlier you are, the greater the trauma and the greater the belief of the injury. Does that make sense? Because the younger you are, the more innocent I am and the more it's going to hurt, because you don't have enough reasoning to know that this person's an idiot. Like, why did they do that in the first place? Especially affairs, especially people that are divorced and they overwhelmed by it. Now, divorce is terrible, affairs are terrible, so I won't take away the fact that they're terrible. What I want to take away is this. If a person's so overwhelmed because a person left them and they're more overwhelmed than the other person, my thinking is like, where's your self-worth? Because if the person is not a good person to begin with, why are you grieving the loss of not a good person? It's because I'm feeling like most people have a greater amount of loss feeling in spite of how badly the other person is because I have a sense of loss in general, because I keep on losing people in my life, such as my mother or father, and then we look to this person with too much emphasis to save my life. Are you tracking me here? So same thing with anything else. So when I make somebody else or money or something a greater God than my Father, Abba Father in heaven, then we're always going to have a greater sense of, because I don't realize what I already have in Christ, that you own all the cattle and all the hill, but the problem is your worth is not greater. So I have to go back to who didn't give you a sense of worth of believing you're better than what you have now. So what I want to do is helping a person feel better about themselves now. We have to go back to find out why you didn't get it in the first place. Who did not give that to you? Like with Pablo, so he had this problem, this anxiety. Anxiety is not a now issue. So I realized that, and he seems a really good man. a strong person, and he's the fact that you're from California. You came all the way here to go to this conference, which is awesome, okay? So obviously you're looking for something more, and I could tell this man doesn't want that. So why are you carrying it around with all the power that I believe you know you have, but you believe it here? The problem is it's hard to believe it here because somebody else heard this. I can't believe in myself or somebody greater or God can't believe in something greater than what I have unless somebody of greater authority believed in me first. I've got to get that belief first before I have it on myself. Somebody then didn't give that to you. And chances are then your father didn't protect you from your stepmother. That's even worse. So you've been hurt twice. So what we want to do is we want to ask what is the issue at that moment, and then we want to find out, rate the amount you have, which is number 2, the amount you feel is 0 to 10. I typically use 0 to 10 because we need some kind of a measuring tool. So if you just pray for a person, how do you feel now compared to what? All right? So this gave me a tool to keep on going down, like with Penny, we kept on going down to you got to the 1. And the fact that it was a 1, I just keep praying, and you did, and it went away. So because I know there was more. And sometimes we just need a little bit of time to think it out and pray it out because it's a process. It's only because, for example, with Penny, with you, is that you didn't have anybody to comfort you to help you work through the process every time it hurt you. So every time we get hurt, we have a choice. Well, sometimes we're not given a choice. We either can let it go or we hold on to it. But if I'm a helpless person, I hold on to it because nobody's there to help me. That's with the little kids. Does that make sense? So we need to then do now what was not done then. Okay, so now let's go to the number 3. Picture a safe person in the memory protecting and hugging you. Use the love hug, the love pat for comfort, giving the hurt to the safe person. All right, so I need to go over this one a little more. Now, so before I start with everybody, I ask you, who's a safe person in your life? And I say aunt, uncle, and I say along with Jesus. Now, in my book, I talk about I put the safe person first. I don't assume, because I do not assume Jesus is a safe person. Even though we know intellectually he is, and we know spiritually he is, but that doesn't mean emotionally he is for each person. Does that make sense? And so if a human being hurt you and a person of authority in your life, typically we need to have an image or a sense of a human being that's safe to reverse what we received. So it's very difficult to release a hurtful emotional experience unless I have a equal or greater comfort experience to be safe enough to release it. So I have them put with Jesus, and I don't even know, that's why I have to ask them, do you have a relationship with Jesus, all right? So Jesus is our power, and then we find our comfort. If you can't find a comfort person, see them in a bubble. This is in the book. Tell Jesus hello for me too. Okay, so we would put them in and I always show them a 2 to 3 inch plexiglass thick bubble that you can see on the outside and hear on the outside, but they can't touch you while you're inside. Now, occasionally what I'll do is if I feel led to it, I'd have that person themselves, or I have myself be in the bubble with them if they trust me. But, you know, that's if I've known them a while. I'll have myself. But I will not always use myself because they don't know me so that well. Now, let's go to one other thing. So at the very end on number 3, when it's giving hurt to a safe person, there's 2 asterisks, right? So at the very bottom of this, and this information is in this book, the advanced option, all right? This is advanced option to release the visual, right? So what God gave me about a year or 2 ago was how we use and store trauma. This is advanced. That's why it really talks more about it in when how to pray when healing doesn't happen. This is also in the back. In this book, Breaking Emotional Barriers of Healing, on page 190, is a self-care prayer. In chapter 10, it talks about praying for others. It's really about the same thing, but on page 190, 192, no, 190, 191 is a self-care prayer, so you can just pray for yourself, and explains a lot more about the visual. Okay, so think about it this way. When you have taken on information, we have 5 senses, as I mentioned yesterday. And so when you're hurt, children are hurt especially, all 5 senses shut down. So when you're comforted, all 5 senses are relaxed because you feel safer, and then all 5 senses open up 100% for little children when they're safe. It doesn't happen as an adult because the more we've been hurt and that's not been reversed, the more I feel unsafe. Even if you are a friend of theirs, they still have a succession of unsafe. Does that make sense? This is just psychology 101, basically. But also what happens is, out of the 5 senses, there's 3 senses that that produce hurt the most. One is physical, that's obvious. The next one is visual, and the third one is audio, and then taste and smell, all right? So that's why when things happen in our life, even in adulthood, that information comes into our mind. And when it comes into our mind, we have a choice to hold on to it or let it go. If we're not feeling safe and we hold on to it, it gets stored in my brain. It gets stored in my brain in one of 6 areas. Chris, will you go to the last slide? There you go. Okay, so it's one of 6 areas. The top of your brain is visual, right or left. The middle is audio, right or left. And the bottom is feeling, right or left. Those are the 6 areas where it gets stored. So that's why when you ask, so from now on, ask somebody a question, and they'll go, so you say, so when did you graduate from high school? 1974. The last place they look before they tell you is where it's stored. So what happens is if you're doing ministry with somebody and you are asking them a question, watch their eyes. So when did that happen about your father left your family? That was probably when I was 5 years old. That's where it's stored. So I have them look up there, and I have them look up there while they see Jesus and their comfort person hugging them, and it releases faster, half the speed. Now, I didn't do this yet with the SOAP people, but I'm going to show you how to do this. So what I'm doing is I'm adding another sense. So the more senses you utilize, the faster it will go. And because it's stored in your body, in your brain, literally in your body and in your brain. So I'm finding out where it's stored on my brain and then your body, all right? So we're going to release it this way. All right, so, okay, let me also back up about regarding the other form of sense. Sense is physical. So remember, why do we do, first of all, this is a universal hug, universal comfort sign, right? And also when we comfort our children, we give them a little hug and a little love pat, is what I call it. And so when we do this, we're doing a little love pat. We're doing the same thing we do, hopefully, for our children, but it probably wasn't done. Even if you're an adult, you could use it now. But there's 2 reasons why I have you do this. One is, again, I mentioned about, this is what God told me many years ago, is that when we dream, okay, so God created us to release. Do you know that you're not supposed to hold on to anything? You're supposed to release everything that's not good. But if we're not safe and we don't have the opportunity to, we're going to hold on to it. So for example, crying, laughing, sweating, dreaming, these are all releases. Elimination, that's all releasing. If you don't release, you get toxins build up in your body and you get deathly sick. That's why, like, when you go to the hospital, even if your condition is better, they won't let you leave until you eliminate properly on both ends. Because if you don't, and you go home, you're going to get sick because they both are toxins. That's why we release them. But they want you to do it properly, all right? So dreaming, there's two primary reasons for dreaming. The primary, the first reason is to release trauma. That's why we dream. The second reason, if we're into it, is to hear from God. That's it. Those two reasons, all right? So when we dream during REM. REM is rapid eye movement. This is in my book. This is explained well in Breaking Emotional Barriers to Healing, Chapter 10. And so our eyes go back and forth really fast, like this, when we dream. We don't realize that we're dreaming because we're asleep. So when it goes to the left side, it stimulates the left hemisphere to release emotion. When it goes to the right side to release emotion. The left side is to release memory. That's all we do when we're dreaming. So everybody do this. Put your hands like this, please. And just tap like this. Okay, now you're doing manual REM. Okay, in my book, I talk about showing this. This is a universal sign for hugging, all right? But since you're here and a little bit more advanced and you want to use this, I want you to tap right here under your clavicle. Yeah, just tap like that under your clavicle. Now, right under your clavicle is a meridian point. You have meridian points throughout your body. It's what they use for acupuncture now. You know, this is not new age. We're not doing acupuncture. We're just tapping into releasing a point. That's a release point. It'll go twice as fast because you're actually you're pulling it out. You're pushing it out. And so all right. So we've got physical, and the next thing I do is I will have visual, and the next thing I'll do, what would it sound like? Audio, and then it just goes. All right. You get this so far, and I'll show you how to do that. All right, so we got that on number 3, and then while they're doing that, I will pray. Now, I don't always have to do this, but obviously, in the name of Yeshua, I release, this is number 4, the emotional, physical, sight, hearing, and cellular memory trauma in Jesus' name. So during the love hug and love pat, envision the condition and the feelings of the safe person, handing it to them as you're doing it. And then I'll pray over them. Now, so primarily there's physical trauma, there's eye gate trauma of what you see, there's ear gate trauma of what you hear, there's also cellular memory trauma. Cellular memory trauma, so if I get hurt physically, that's going to hurt, but it's also damaging my cells. I pray for a lot of people that have had post-surgical pain. I had a gentleman one time that had a total knee done, but he was back in a wheelchair and he had still pain. Like they say, it'll take it away, but it didn't. Well, what we don't realize, if you ever worked in a hospital, or especially in a surgical suite, you realize that what they do is, it's just gross, actually, what they do is, they cut 4 layers of skin, they open it up with clamps, they hold it with clamps, they saw your bone, they knock the bone off, they drill another bone piece in, and they put the two together, and then, it's like, just hearing it sounds awful. So that your body has a memory, even though you're asleep, you're under anesthesia, that's what they have to do. So your body's going to have a lot of memory trauma. So we pray against it. Anyway, so I asked the man, now remember, he was under anesthesia, but I had him to visualize what it would be like. So if somebody goes to the past but doesn't remember it, ask them what they think. You'll come up with the right answer. Ask them what they think, what they feel, what they think it would feel back then. So I said, picture yourself on the gurney in the operating room. Okay, I can do that. And I asked permission to put my hand on his knee. And so I said, picture Jesus putting his hand on your knee. I said, and I just rebuked cellular memory trauma, physical trauma, in the name of Jesus, and the pain went away. So he had a visual, he had a physical, and that helped increase the release. Does that make sense? All right. So then what I want to do is number 5, want to declare your healing and use the love pad to give your thoughts and feelings to the safe person and the condition. And now what's it like 0 to 10, 0, hopefully till it gets to 0 to 1. So if the feelings do not change, just repeat the process. Now, if for some reason it doesn't change and they get stuck, that just means there's something earlier that hurt them. Just like what Penny said, she asked the Lord what to do next, and the Lord took it to utero. That happens a lot, by the way. Okay, so any questions before I, on that? Yes. Okay, right brain is the emotional side. Left brain is the memory side. And so all we're doing is releasing. That's really what we want to do. It's the emotion from the incident, the memory from the incident. If you don't remember it, just have the person, like I said, well, I don't remember what it was like growing up under 10. I said, well, you know what your parents were like, yeah. Just guess what it would be like to live in that home with the way your parents were. Just guess. Just picture something like that. Now, don't worry about it if you don't have an actual picture. That's okay. Just go there and just see that person in that home with a father yelling or mom and dad yelling. Yes. When do you use the what? Oh, that's a whole nother level. Yeah. So, I mean, I got another advanced level after this, but this is enough. We'll start this. So, looking to the right or left is just as good. All right. And then that's what they get really stuck, and I can show you if we need to. All right. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
What if they show the fruit of travel, like
Here, would you, so they can get this.
What if they show symptoms of that they had trauma, but they have no memory of no events? They think they had great childhood, they had great parents, like zero trauma.
All right, so everybody heard that, right? Yeah, give that to Jesse. Why don't you hold on to it, Jesse? Okay, so what if they had no memories of the trauma, but they have a pain and they had trauma, but they don't remember it, and they say they had a good childhood? Okay, now, I get this a lot. So use your common sense or your intuition. So if a person's in a lot of pain and a lot of stuff in their life, and they don't have an origin, chances are they didn't have, they don't know what trauma is, or they haven't. I'll give you an example. It's often where people don't remember the way the childhood is because, look, trauma is relative. It's subjective. In other words, most people think trauma is if something really bad happens, but they don't realize that if my father's always giving me a hard time, or if my mother and father are yelling, like it's a way of life, that's trauma. But it was a way of life. That's the way life is. No, that's not the way life should be. That's the way you lived, and it made me afraid. And the more afraid I am, the more my body shuts down, the more I couldn't. You know, even with Jesse, why do you think Jesse held everything in? Because he had to. He learned that, but that was his normal. Okay, now I knew it wasn't normal, so I could kind of sense it, but you know, I'm not going to say, Jesse, you really got a lot of problems. Now, I don't think he has a lot of problems. He just has a lot of hurt. But that's up to him to let it go. And so he was brave enough to say, yeah, I'll let you pray for me. And he did, and then there's the result. Awesome. So now Jesse can pray for people. And Pablo can now pray for people. So Pastor, you're going to have, this is your prayer warrior that's going to go up and start praying for people. And Penny too. All right, so I'll give you an example. So I had a gentleman, I don't know, in his 50s, I said he had a lot of depression and anxiety and so on. I said, so have you had, Lord, take him back to, had any trauma in his life or any events that were hurtful? actually I talked about trauma first, and that's why I don't use the word trauma, because people don't really know what that means. So I said, I really haven't had, it was a good childhood, no problem. And I knew there was something still not right. And I said, well, were you hurt by anybody? Did anybody do something that hurt you? He kept on saying a couple of times there was no trauma or no bad things that happened. And then I questioned him even more specifically, did somebody do something that hurt you? Well, when I was a kid, when I was mowing the lawn, I didn't have any shoes on and I cut off 2 toes. My brother actually shot a BB gun and hit me in the eye. I said, you know those are trauma. Oh, I just said that's the way life is. Okay? So you got to realize that trauma, it's all relative, so you got to be really specific. And if they don't remember, and that happens a lot because we just put it away. So if they put it away, say, so what would it be like to live in a home the way your mom and dad were? Just think of your home. Just think of your home. In the name of Jesus, I call up from the depths of your soul, in the name of Yeshua Jesus, what was it like just living in your home? Just think of that. Now, this will stir up right and left hemisphere. Just do this as you're even talking. All right? It's already, that's what this is.